The Vilafort mansion stood atop a hill where the wind seemed to have forgotten to blow. The surrounding trees didn't sway, the iron gates didn't creak, and even the birds seemed to avoid that patch of sky. It was as if the entire property had made a pact with silence, and the silence had agreed to stay forever. Inside the house, the clocks ticked away at hours no one counted. Heavy curtains kept the rooms in perpetual twilight, and the servants walked the corridors like obedient shadows, never raising their voices. There was an unwritten rule in that house that everyone knew. One did not speak of the past, one did not open a window without permission, and above all, one did not speak to the Duke unless he spoke first. Rafael Vilafort was 34 years old, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived twice as long. He walked through the mansion's halls with slow, measured steps, like a man who had learned to occupy as little space as possible within his own life. His hands, always behind his back, held each other as if preventing themselves from touching anything that might still hurt. And almost everything hurt. It had been 5 years since Cecilia had left, not willingly, not out of betrayal, from illness. A fever that began on an autumn Tuesday and ended on a Sunday, taking with it the only person who had ever made Rafael believe that there was any gentleness in the world. Since then, he hadn't cried, hadn't laughed, hadn't raised his voice for anything that wasn't strictly necessary. The servants said he wasn't cruel, just absent, like a house with the lights on but no one inside. The only thing that still tied him to the world was the library. Every afternoon at 3 o'clock, he would sit in the same brown leather armchair, open a book, and stay there until the natural light disappeared. He never lit a candle. When darkness fell, he would simply close the book, rest his hands on the arms of the armchair, and stare into nothingness, like someone waiting for something he knows will never arrive. It was in this context that Isadora appeared. She arrived one morning in a light rain, with a worn leather bag tied with string and her shoes covered in mud. He was 23 years old, with brown hair that never stayed in place, and a way of walking that seemed to apologize to the ground for stepping on it. The employment agency had sent her as the new librarian, the third in 2 years, because none of the previous ones could bear the weight of that silence. The housekeeper, Donna Marta, greeted her at the back door with a look that was less welcoming and more of a warning. She explained the rules in short, dry sentences: mealtimes, permitted areas, forbidden areas. "And as for the Duke," she said, lowering her voice as if he could hear through the walls, "you don't speak to him, you don't look at him, you don't make a sound. If he enters the library while you're there, you leave, no questions." Isadora nodded, gripping the handle of her suitcase so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She knew this job was her last chance. She'd been fired from the downtown bookstore for knocking over an entire shelf of first editions. Before that, she'd lost her job at the school for tripping over the projector cable during a parent-teacher meeting. Her mother used to say that Isadora had her heart in the right place, but her feet nowhere. The world seemed too big for her body, and she was always bumping into the edges. In the first few days, everything went as Donna Marta had instructed. Isadora arrived early, cataloged the books in silence, organized the shelves, and meticulously dusted the spines with almost surgical precision. When she heard the Duke's footsteps approaching, she gathered her materials and disappeared through the side door like a frightened cat. He never saw her. She never confronted him. The system worked. Until the day it didn't work. It was a Thursday, and Isadora was at the top of a wooden ladder, trying to reach a volume of poetry that someone had placed on the highest shelf, probably as punishment for anyone who wanted to read it. She stretched out her arm, felt her fingers touch the spine of the book, and then her foot slipped. The ladder tilted, the book fell, and Isadora came right after, knocking down with her a pile of bound volumes that tumbled down like an avalanche of paper and leather onto the mahogany floor of the library. The noise was absolute, a bang that seemed to tear the fabric of silence that had covered that house for 5 years. And when the dust settled and Isadora opened her eyes, sitting on the floor among scattered books, her hair in her face and a speck of dust on her cheek, she saw Rafael Vilafort standing in the doorway. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger, it wasn't surprise. It was something more like bewilderment, as if he had forgotten that other people existed and was now being forced to remember. I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll fix everything." "I always do. I always mess things up and then fix them, which is almost the same thing, just in the wrong order." He didn't answer. He stood there for a long moment looking at her, as if trying to process the presence of that awkward creature in the middle of his private cathedral of silence. Then, without saying a word, he turned his back and walked away. Isadora sat on the floor for another 10 minutes, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She waited for the dismissal notice to arrive. She waited for Donna Marta's voice, the disapproving look, the suitcase being placed outside. But nothing came. The house fell silent again, and she resumed arranging her books, her hands trembling and her eyes moist. The next day, Rafael entered the library at his usual time, 3 in the afternoon. Isadora was there in the corner, cataloging. She froze, ready to leave, but before she could move, he did something she didn't expect. He sat in the armchair, opened his book, and, without looking at her, said, "You can stay." They were just 2 words. But in that house, where even the air seemed to ask permission to circulate, 2 words were worth as much as an entire speech. She stayed. And in the days that followed, a strange routine began to form. He read, she organized. Neither of them spoke. But the other's presence filled the space in a different way, not as an invasion, but as silent company. Like 2 people sitting on the same bench at a station, waiting for trains that might never arrive, but finding some comfort in not waiting alone. Isadora couldn't maintain her gracefulness for long. In the 2nd week, she dropped an inkwell on the oak table. In the 3rd, she tripped on the rug and bumped her elbow on the bookshelf, causing 3 books to fall. In the 4th, she sneezed so loudly that Rafael looked up from his book for the first time in days. Each mishap left her redder, more embarrassed, more certain that she would be fired. But he never ordered it. And what she didn't know, what no one in that house knew, was that with each small disaster, something inside Rafael stirred. It wasn't irritation, it was something else, something he hadn't felt in so long that it took him weeks to recognize. It was anticipation. For the first time in 5 years, he entered the library with a shadow of curiosity about what would happen that afternoon. The first real conversation took place on a stormy day. The power went out and the library was plunged into total darkness. Isadora, who had been afraid of thunder since childhood, let out a low sound, not a scream, but almost a frightened murmur. And then she heard his voice, calm, coming from somewhere in the darkness. "Don't move. You have candles in the 2nd drawer on the right." She groped for the drawer, found the candles, and he lit one with a match he took from his coat pocket. The flame illuminated his face from below, and for a second Isadora thought she saw something in his eyes that seemed almost gentle. "Thank you," she said. "There's no need to thank me for something that was already here," he replied. And then, without knowing exactly how, they started talking. Not about important things, about books, about favorite chapters, about characters who deserved different endings. Isadora talked too much, stumbled over her words as if tripping over rugs, backtracked, corrected herself, laughed at herself. And Rafael listened. He listened with an attention she had never received from anyone, as if every poorly chosen word of hers was the most worthy thing he had heard in years. The conversations began to happen every day, first brief, then long. He started asking about her life, and she spoke candidly. Her father who left when she was 6, her mother who worked 3 jobs, the shoes that were never the right size, the constant feeling of being both too much and too little at the same time, of occupying the wrong space, of never quite fitting in anywhere. She recounted these things without drama, without self-pity, like someone describing the weather outside. And that was what disarmed him, the absence of pretense. The raw honesty of someone who hadn't learned to hide her wounds because no one had ever cared enough for her to feel the need to hide them. One afternoon in October, she asked about Cecilia. She didn't know she shouldn't. No one had warned her about that specific name. Donna Marta had said the past tense so vaguely that Isadora didn't know exactly what to avoid. So she asked, with the naturalness of someone asking about the weather, the portrait above the fireplace. "Who is it?" The silence that followed was so dense she could almost touch it. Rafael remained motionless, the book forgotten in his lap, his eyes fixed on some point that didn't exist in the room. And Isadora knew, in that instant, that she had touched something she shouldn't have. He opened his mouth to apologize, to undo it, to fix it, as he always tried to fix everything. But before he could speak, he said, "My wife." 2 words. And his voice trembled on the second one in such a subtle way that anyone else would have missed it. But Isadora wasn't just anyone. Isadora was someone who constantly noticed the wrong details, the forgotten corners, the things nobody else thought were important. And she heard that tremor as if it were a scream. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say anything motivational or comforting. She just sat there on the floor among the books and said, she was beautiful. And perhaps it was the simplicity of that phrase. Or perhaps it was the fact that Isadora didn't treat Cecilia as a taboo subject, but as a real person who deserved to be mentioned. Or perhaps it was simply the accumulation of 5 years of contained grief that finally found a crack through which to flow. But that afternoon, for the first time since the funeral, Rafael Vilafort cried. It wasn't a dramatic cry. There were no sobs, no collapse. It was something that happened almost entirely inside, eyes slowly filling, a single tear running down her face, her jaw clenched like someone fighting against themselves and losing. And Isadora remained silent, without moving, without trying to fix things, without offering words that would be too small for that pain. She simply stayed. and sometimes staying is the bravest thing someone can do for another person. After that afternoon, something changed in the Vilafort mansion. It wasn't a visible change, nothing the staff could point to or name, but the air felt different, a little lighter. A curtain was drawn in the east hallway. The cook was instructed to prepare tea for 2 at 4 o'clock. Donna Marta noticed that the Duke had requested flowers for the coffee table, something that hadn't happened since the Duchess was alive. Isadora continued to be clumsy. She continued to drop things, trip, talk too much, laugh at the wrong moments. But Rafael had stopped seeing this as a flaw. He had begun to see it as life, as the exact opposite of that sterile silence he had built around himself like a wall. Every noise she made was a crack in that wall, and he had stopped wanting to fix them, but the proximity brought glances that were not kind. Local society began to murmur. A duke of ancient lineage and a librarian with no surname, no possessions, no name. The Countess of Alvarez' visits became more frequent, and her comments sharper. "How charming," she would say with a smile that was pure vinegar. "The Duke has found such picturesque company." The servants exchanged glances, the maids whispered, and Isadora listened. I heard everything with that ear she had for things nobody wanted her to hear. I heard the muffled laughter as she passed by in the hallway. He heard the word, "out of place," repeated like a verdict. He heard, "She thinks she can, and poor thing, she doesn't know her place, and it's only a matter of time." She didn't say anything to Rafael. She didn't want to be another burden. She didn't want him to have to choose between his world and her presence, because she always knew, what the outcome would be. People like her didn't stay in places like that. People like her were temporary in other people's lives. One November morning, she left a letter on the library table and left before sunrise. The letter was short, written in the crooked handwriting he had learned to read as if deciphering a secret language. It simply said, "Thank you for letting me stay. I've never belonged anywhere before, and even if this isn't mine, it's the closest I've ever come. Take care of the east shelves, they need strengthening, and open the curtains now and then. Light is good for you, even when it hurts." Rafael read the letter standing in the middle of the empty library. He read it once, twice, 3 times, and on the third reading, something inside him broke in a way that was different from grief. It broke like a dam, not to destroy, but to finally let the water flow. He found her at the train station, sitting on the wooden bench with the same worn leather suitcase tied with string. She was looking at her own shoes, which still weren't the right size, and when she heard his footsteps on the stone floor, she looked up with that expression that was half surprise, half fear of expecting too much. He didn't make a speech. He didn't kneel. He didn't say the words that novels would teach. He stood before her, his coat wet with dew and his eyes red from walking too fast or crying for the first time in a long time, and said, "The bookshelves in the east need reinforcement. And I don't know how to do it myself." Isadora looked at him for a long moment. She searched his eyes for any sign of pity, of obligation, of aristocratic politeness disguised as affection. She found none. What she found was something far rarer and far more frightening. She found someone who was seeing her, truly, not the polished version, not the version that tried to be less, not the version that apologized for existing. He was seeing her, the one who dropped things, the one who talked too much, the one who stumbled. And he was there at the train station, soaked in dew, asking her to stay. She gripped the suitcase tighter as if she needed something to anchor herself to. Her eyes burned. She opened her mouth to say something intelligent, or at least coherent, but what came out was, "Did you come by carriage or on foot?" And he smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile that appeared in the left corner of her mouth and slowly rose, like a plant breaking through concrete. A smile that no one in that house had seen in 5 years. A smile that didn't erase the pain, didn't pretend the past didn't exist, but that said, with all the imperfection in the world, that perhaps there was room for something else besides grief. They returned together along the dirt road, not holding hands, not with promises, not with certainties. Just together. 2 people who carried different wounds, but who had found in each other's imperfect presence something that resembled rest. That afternoon, the Vilafort library had all the curtains open. The light streamed in golden beams that touched the spines of the books like curious fingers. Tea was set for 2. And at the top of the wooden ladder, Isadora was trying to reach a volume of poetry on the highest shelf, while Rafael held the base of the ladder with both hands, looking up with something in his eyes that was no longer empty. "Be careful," he said. "I'm always careful," she replied. "It's the care you don't show me." And he almost laughed. Almost. The sound got stuck somewhere between his chest and throat, in a place that was still learning to open. But it was opening. Slowly, fearfully, stumbling, like everything that is true. Donna Marta, walking down the hallway, heard something that made her stop. It wasn't the sound of books falling. It wasn't silence. It was something in between. A hushed conversation, a stifled laugh, the sound of two people existing in the same space without apologizing for it. She didn't go into the library. She just smiled to herself and kept walking. Because some stories don't need witnesses to be true. They only need two people who decided, against all evidence, that it's worth trying to occupy that same silence and transform it, little by little, into something that resembles a home. The Vilafort mansion still stood atop the hill where the wind seemed to have forgotten to blow. But now, if one listened carefully, one could hear, coming from within, very softly, almost like a secret, the sound of someone stumbling over something, followed by the rarest and most beautiful sound that house had ever known. The sound of someone laughing again.